when we talk about a hostile world, we need to acknowledge that in a lot of the West, the world has become more hostile to Christian faith and practice. And I wouldn't say, it's probably worth saying hostile there's not widespread persecution. We're not living in North Korea. Sometimes I hear American Christians and make it sound like they're living in North Korea, but it doesn't mean that there's not hostility. And one way to articulate that is we've sort of lost our home field advantage. And that's a pretty significant shift. You can feel that shift in our culture, and Christians who, were largely trusted in society. Keep in mind that when Hollywood, which is, where American movies are made, at least traditionally, when Hollywood created the film standards boards where we get rated PG or rated PG-13 or rated R, they actually work with the Catholic Church to create that. I can assure you Hollywood's not calling anybody from the Catholic Church to create moral standards today. So now there was a privileged place that we had, and we've lost that home field advantage, but we increasingly feel that in a sense we're on the other side of the cultural divide. There was, even though most people weren't religiously active in 20, 30 years ago, they still had a respect for religion and particularly for Christianity. And I think that's waned, and some of that has to do with some cultural issues. So Christians, particularly evangelical Christians, and there's a couple of groups that sort of align with them on this, Catholics and Mormons, conservative practicing Catholics and Mormons, all are on the other side of the mainstream cultural view on same-sex marriage, for example. So that creates a hostility, and you feel that hostility sometimes when you hold a traditional view of marriage, or increasingly as gender identity has become a much more driving thing. You feel that, and there are groups on the more progressive side who would say that Christians, evangelical Christians specifically named, are the resistors to the new cultural reality. Well, that's the reality, and I think partly we need to adopt an idea that we are indeed a minority, but we're a convictional minority. And we need to be able to clearly articulate our convictions based on biblical values. That because we have been changed by the power of the gospel, we do believe different things that are outside of the cultural mainstream. Now, the difference is, your parents and your grandparents' Christianity, they believed similarly on the few cultural issues I mentioned, and the culture agreed with them. Now, the culture didn't agree with them on other things. Gospel Christians were advocating for a change of view of race and an impact of the civil rights movement, or gospel Christians, were part of the people who, gave women the right to vote, that women were actually, Christian women were part of this. And Susan B. Anthony, people will be shocked to surprise just how committed to her Christian faith she was. So Christians have been on the other side of cultural issues, persuading culture to change. Well, on this side, culture's changed its mind and we've not. So for the first time in decades, again, this ties into losing our home field advantage, we're going to have to advocate as a convictional minority. To be transparent, we haven't always done that well. Sometimes we sounded pretty shrill, and sometimes we sounded pretty, more like yelling on social media than trying to show the love of Jesus to our neighbor with whom we disagree. So I think we've got some ways to learn to develop how to articulate those convictions well. But I just think we need to acknowledge that the times have changed. This is, and part of the challenge is that the times have changed, but maybe the way we articulate our deeply convictional biblical beliefs, we haven't learned to articulate them when the culture sees us as the problem, whereas in the past maybe they saw us as part of the solution. But here's the great thing: the Word of God hasn't changed. God's design and intent hasn't changed. We seek to show and share the love of Jesus to a broken and hurting world, even one that's hostile towards us.